It's back. What's it? Well, I'm back. But also COVID, it's back, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Command Briefing. I'm your host, Jared A. Chambers. Man, why am I even doing a show tonight? And on the live broadcast, we're running a little bit late this evening. Sorry about that, but if you're listening live, welcome. If you're listening on replay, what difference does it make? So, yeah, why do a broadcast tonight anyway? There's obviously nothing to talk about. If there were, we wouldn't be talking about COVID-19, that is. And if you do the math, we're in 23. That makes this whole COVID thing 4 years old. Yeah, it's a toddler. It's getting into stuff. It's troublesome. And it's back. Yeah, so, yeah, what can you say about this? I mean, I'm seeing all of the I won't comply out there, and I think that's great, by the way. I encourage people to not comply. However, I'm skeptical, I have to say, because people did comply. This has been done. We have real-world experience on this, and we've seen people comply en masse. And they're likely to again. Now, to the extent that more people are willing to stand up, that's great. But that brings to mind what we talked about last week when I talked about how you build your escape plan from the system. And remember what I said? You've got to get really comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable. Because that's been the number one means of control within the system, is that you get used to your good paying job, you get used to predictability, you get used to institutions and systems that kind of set guardrails for your life. And bucking those, even though it might provide you with a greater degree of freedom and even expand your voice and show those in power that they still need your consent. They need the consent of the governed. But you are likely going to suffer in the short term. So when we talk about things like COVID compliance, so I am unvaccinated. Best decision I ever made in my life. I can also tell you that it has cost me immensely from a financial standpoint. And the bad part of it is it's hard to get an accounting of it because in my case, it all has plausible deniability. I worked for years in the healthcare sector in technical sales and marketing, sales enablement, top functions. I ended up leaving a company because it was bought out in 2021, just as the masking madness was starting to crescendo. The vaccine madness was starting to really crescendo, and Biden pushing things like federal requirements around things like vaccines. And so that put me out in the job market at a time where a lot of companies, especially if you were in healthcare and dependent upon government dollars, and also just the groupthink that goes along with the medical industry, Yeah, I know it cost me job opportunities, good job opportunities. And the longer that you twist in the wind out there, even if those mandates kind of roll back some, it gets harder and harder to get back into that world. And by the way, there are some companies in that world, especially, I know for a fact, they're still mandating the vax. It hasn't gone away. And so it's really bold to say that you won't comply. And again, I applaud you, but understand what you're in for if it comes down to that. You've still got kids in government school. What are you going to do? You're going to take them out mid-year? Homeschool them? I mean, I hope that you're willing to. You've got this good job. You're making, $100,000 a year. And they reissue mandates. You've got kids that you're sending off to college. You want them to get that degree. They've already been working on it. You want them to miss their last year or two of school where they've already started. Yeah, understand. There are real consequences to what you're talking about, because if the state wants to bring power to bear on this, they will. Now, that deserves talking about, because the motives of this, are they really intending to do a complete replay of 2020? I think that's exceedingly difficult to do from a lot of standpoints, a lot of reasons. Yes, you have more resistance. People learned that they were lied to before, and there are people who won't comply, thankfully. Plus, everyone's talking about this new variant of COVID. And yes, it's absolutely ginned up hysteria. But everyone assumes that it is about the election next year. To an extent, I'm sure. I mean, it's not that that's not a factor. I'm not saying that. It's awful early to pull that card. Keep in mind, in 2020, that election, when did they pull that card? 2020. They didn't pull it over a year ahead of time. They pulled it just over 6 months ahead of time. And it worked beautifully for their purposes, because everyone was in the midst of the confusion. To try to keep this level of confusion going for 15 plus months, 16 months, it's hard to see them doing that. So then the question is, what exactly is going on? Because again, it's another psyop, of course. Well, I don't know. It seems like a lot of people, the news cycle has been so full for so long, it can become easy, I think, to start missing the obvious. And one of the obvious things here is a profit motive. Because even though we have this new variant, supposedly, well, they're still pushing getting the clot shot as a response to it. Plus, all of a sudden, it seems like, hey, we are already working and we're going to roll out vaccines that are specific to this. But in the meantime, get your booster, get your RSV shot, get all your shots. The existing stuff apparently is, to them, a valid response to this. That's interesting. Why is that interesting? Because we are in August, which means that we are in the first month of a new quarter, a new financial quarter. What did we find out literally just over 2 weeks ago? Headline from the Wall Street Journal: Pfizer's COVID boost crashes to earth. With the lift from pandemic vaccine and drug sales over, Pfizer's CEO bets on new drug approvals and deals. Yeah, this is dated August the 6th, just over a couple of weeks ago. At the time, it was understood, and I think this story got little traction because people do have fatigue over anything COVID related. But I took note of it. I remembered it. And when this whole Eris thing, new variant, came along, I mean, it's the first thing that popped in my mind. But I knew, again, 2 weeks ago, hearing this, they're not going to sit idly by and be satisfied with losing that much easy money. They were actually talking about rolling back R&D on COVID. This was the story midsummer, not long ago. People are not getting this shot anymore. People don't care. It's costing COVID money. And then the financial reports came out for the end of the quarter, confirmed what people were guessing. Nobody's getting the shots. Pfizer's not making money. And as this whole new variant thing has heated up, I went back today and I researched because I'm like, okay, when exactly did we start talking about this new variant? And it turns out it was just a hair over a week ago. It was about 1 week after that headline that I just read to you. Here's one from Reuters on August the 14th. New COVID vaccines are on the way as Eris variant rises. And as I went through the stack, like all of the initial reporting, widespread reporting about this goes to about that time frame. The earliest stories being about in that August 14th range, about 1 week after we find out that Pfizer has had a lousy year so far because nobody's buying the vax anymore. Nobody wants the vax anymore. And even as they're saying we're going to roll back R&D, somehow they have new vaccines on the way for this new variant. I mean, it makes no sense other than if they can whip up some people and make some money off of this. That's obviously in their interest. This whole thing has been a boon to Pfizer in particular from the beginning. Pfizer and Ukraine, as one, seem to own the entirety of the United States government. I mean, seriously, if you look at the connections and what politicians are most interested in and who they're most interested in seeing get paid, it's Pfizer and Ukraine by a long shot. Sorry, Lockheed Martin, you're out of this. Halliburton, all of the big corporatist scandals of yesteryear where people worried about corporate influence on the government and what we were doing abroad to line pockets of political donors. Everyone forgets all that now. Ukraine is a big money laundering operation, and COVID is a big money laundering operation. Pfizer making money off the COVID thing. Donors in defense industry making money off of the Ukraine thing. So yes, money has got to be a key motive, I think even more so than the election, given how far away from the election that we are. Now, I said, it's not that the election isn't at all related to this. So, as everything has blown up this summer, well, actually, I'm going to save this explanation for after the break, because we're going to go into this a little bit about what I think is also at play here too. But we do need to stop and take a brief time out for a break. So I'm going to ask you to hang in there, and I'll be back in just a moment. Thanks for hanging in there, folks, through the break. We're back and talking about this new COVID strain, supposedly. But the real strain is the media strain. Suddenly, it's all anyone can talk about, and it has absorbed a lot of the online news cycle today. Because it gets a reaction from people, right? I mean, talking about what I said before, all of these people out there saying defiantly, I won't comply. Again, that's great. I think some of them, especially since they were very compliant before, don't quite know what they're in for fighting this battle with us. I'm used to being on quite a small team with that from initially in 2020. But it gets a reaction out of people. And everything in the news cycle is really geared toward keeping people ginned up, upset, not knowing which way to go, like a squirrel caught out in the middle of a highway with cars coming both directions. And the pain is how... It is the purpose. The pain is the purpose. That is how power is holding on to power, by keeping people confused, not knowing what's coming next, and reacting to things without knowing what they're even reacting to. And there's a lot of that, as they have indicted Trump 4 times, and he goes up in the polls every time, not just against his challengers in the GOP primary, but against head-to-head against Biden, who is suffering because he doesn't care about the worst natural disaster of a long time, and probably one of the worst natural disasters this century so far. Top 3 sort of thing. What are they going to do as they keep pushing the envelope and it keeps helping Trump? They need new chaos. And so I think in some ways, the planting of this seed about a new COVID variant is a little bit of a trial balloon here from the media and establishment power to find out, can we push people's buttons? Will they still comply? Will they go along with things? How far can we push? Because they were able to push really, really far in 2020 because it was an unknown. And people were very afraid, irrationally so, but also it was an unknown, that it was uncharted water. No one had lived through, they thought, a pandemic of that variety. I mean, turns out, I think people have, and just because the hysteria was less, people didn't necessarily realize it. You know, some of the people most upset about COVID 3+ years ago were older people who had lived through the Hong Kong flu, that pandemic in 68. A lot of people died from that. H1N1, certainly bad. Probably not, honestly, on the scale of COVID. COVID, by the way, nobody is saying it's not real. It's definitely real because it was created in a lab and unleashed upon us. And it certainly did have horrific effects on certain segments of the population, particularly people who were older and more vulnerable. By the way, that was always a huge tell, too, that something wasn't right about the virus in terms of this idea that it was a natural thing. It seemed to do a very, very clean job of avoiding the one group that viruses usually wreak absolute havoc with, which is young people. That's, to me, I'm not an epidemiologist, but when you compare it to other known viruses out there, that's a weird thing. It's usually young people who haven't developed immunity. They get ravaged by all kinds of viruses. Historically, and that's why we have childhood vaccinations for things. Well, minus any other theories you might have about vaccinations, but childhood vaccinations, certainly a response to large levels of young people dying in past years from things like polio, measles, mumps, these childhood diseases that ravaged entire families, went through them like wildfire. This one didn't. It was really heavily skewed on the older end of the spectrum. The people who cost more in the healthcare system. I will never, ever trust that wasn't by design. I don't know that it is, but we do know that this was developed in a lab, and it's not beyond the pale to ask the question, was it designed to target specific groups for specific reasons? But having said that, it is no longer 2020, and while we may still fear something that, yes, of course, was cooked up in a lab, we do know there are no 4-year pandemics. There are no permanent pandemics. Never before happened. We know it's political. But again, is the intent really to interfere directly with the election this far out? Probably not, but it is probably to see what they can get away with as we do get closer to the election, because they have a real problem on their hands now. The things that they're doing to take Trump off the board are helping him. And again, I'm not talking on a GOP primary level. I'm not talking about this insane theory by DeSantis and other folks that this was all about helping Trump win the primary so that they could easily beat him in the general. Obviously, that was always facile, stupid reasoning. But they do have a big problem in that they intended to take him off the board altogether. They don't want to run against him. They know that they can beat any of these other bags of sand that are going to stand together on a stage tomorrow night. But Trump is rising in a big way, in a defiant way. And I think that it's a little bit of a trial balloon here to figure out the level of defiance that exists in the public right now. This is a temperature check, I believe. And I don't know quite yet reveal. The initial reactions are certainly positive, but again, I'm always distrustful of people who talk big when they perceive that the challenge ahead is easy before they realize what it really means to never don that mask again. That they might have to actually form co-ops with people to get the goods and services that they need. That they might actually have to pull their kids out of government school because of mandates. That they might actually have to find alternative sources of income because they lose their corporate jobs over this. And to the extent that anyone is willing to fight that battle, I am right here with you. That is why I do this show. That is why I'm on Twitter, because I am living that life. And it is a struggle. And I'm here for freedom lovers who want to defy the system, to keep them informed, to have strong networks and groups, and to share information, but also support and camaraderie and encouragement with each other. But the government needs to know where everyone stands, and what better way to find out than float this little trial balloon as kids are back in school, as we go into the fall, and people start getting the sniffles again, and start wondering, uh-oh, do I have this new COVID variant? Oh my God. The news said that I might get in the hospital and die because I can't get any care because all the beds are taken. I mean, the human mind is an insane thing, folks, when you stoke it with fear constantly. When it is driven by fear hormones constantly. When your adrenaline is always tapped to the max by everything that they're doing to keep us in a permanent state of chaos. I certainly will be watching this because we cannot go through 2020 again. In so many ways, what we have gone through since then has never completely stopped. It has all been one big power grab. But we're not going to take that particular ride on the merry-go-round again, I hope. All right, folks, we're going to take another quick break. And when we get back, going to take a look at some new polls out and also talk about what is ahead this week here in Atlanta town. Stay here. I will be right back. we're back, everybody. We're in the bottom half of Command Briefing. Thanks for listening. And it looks like Trump plans to turn himself in to local authorities in Fulton County on Thursday morning. That will, of course, destroy the news cycle coming out of the Fox News debate tomorrow night, which, honestly, I'm not sure if it even needed to be done. I'm not sure that many people will watch the listless vessels of DeSantis, Pence, Tim Scott, etc., to the extent that it gets any watching at all. I think there's a curiosity amongst people. As I've said for a while now, DeSantis is as much of a backbencher as the rest of them at this point. I think that there's real curiosity on that stage. Does a true new second place, although distant that it will continue to be, but does DeSantis finally lose all claim to this second place standing that he clings so desperately to? Yeah, I think that might get a few eyes on it. People wanting to see how Ramaswamy will do against him. Big efforts to take him down, too, by the way. And I've got to say, I don't trust the guy. I'm a distrustful person. And I wish more people were distrustful. I mean, it's just too easy in politics to come along, say something that you know a lot of people agree with, and build rapport with them so that you can lead them down the garden path. If you look at every con man who's ever existed, what is the con in con man, by the way? Con is short for confidence. It's the confidence game. And how do you build confidence? You connect with people on things that are easily agreed to, that make sense to people. That's how you reel them in. So I will go on record saying I have no reason to trust Vivek Ramaswamy. I have reasons that I certainly distrust him. I think, reading through some of his past statements, he was certainly more critical of the MAGA movement than he is putting forward now. He is very much in favor of things that are antithetical to the MAGA movement, particularly around immigration. And it looks a lot like the old GOP approach to immigration, where people rail against illegal immigration, and the GOP gets up there and says, hey, we agree with you. Illegal immigration is bad. Bad, bad, bad. And we're going to solve it. And how do they solve it? Well, the first thing you do is you make all the illegals legal. That's a nifty way to solve illegal immigration. Make it legal. Or at least give amnesty to certain people, ramp up visa programs, get more people on legal paths here on this fallacious notion that we need a lot more immigration into the country, which I have never bought. So I don't trust this man. However, there's plenty to be critical of without making stuff up. And the DeSantis people who are always so concerned that people are making stuff up about their guy and what he actually said, going back to the listless vessel thing and the denial in some quarters of the campaign that he meant what he said and that he was addressing it toward anyone in particular. But this is the pattern of attacking Vivek about his comments vis-a-vis 9/11 and trying to paint him as a 9/11 truther, i.e. someone who believes 9/11 was an inside job. And I don't subscribe to that theory myself, that it was an inside job. I don't subscribe to the fact that you had to have planted ordnance inside the World Trade Center towers because jet fuel can't burn hot enough to melt steel beams. It's ludicrous. People who think that they have an engineering background because they watch 7 minutes of a YouTube video. I don't go along with that. It also, at the same time, doesn't mean that the government has told you the whole truth that it knows. And that was the point that he was very clearly making. And in doing so, noting, why should any particular questions be off limits? Why can't we ask if there were any government people on any of those planes? In other words, you can believe that it was not an inside job, yet still be skeptical of the idea that the government was basically sandbagged by the whole thing and caught completely off guard and had not put measures in place in advance, ineffective as though they turned out to be. If you're really trying to get to the truth, why are certain questions beyond the pale? Why can you not ask them? And that was the point he very clearly articulated. It's not hard to figure out. You can go back to the transcript. He himself says, I'm not saying that I believe that this was the case. However, why are we shutting down questions about this? And that is correct. And we know it's correct in everything else that we have seen over the years. Again, I don't believe that 9/11 was an inside job any more than I believe that space lasers started the fires in Maui. That doesn't mean that I think that government did a good job with either and couldn't have done better and didn't use the aftermath of the very chaos created by their own incompetence to seek to increase their own power, because you never let a crisis go to waste. And it seems to me that that's a very sensible point of view, that anybody here in the day and age in which we live, you ought to be able to get on board with that. Why is that difficult? So yeah, I think tomorrow night will be an interesting moment to see how this man, who a lot of people like, again, perhaps they should be more careful about that. But he's caused enough of a buzz saying the right things that people are curious. Can he really nail the coffin lid shut on the already dead DeSantis campaign? Or will somebody come out of left field who really has no chance at winning the race, but still is a good enough debater on the debate stage to torpedo somebody else? Think about this. Use the Democrat debates in 2020 as an example of this. Look at Tulsi Gabbard and Kamala Harris. It is widely accepted that Tulsi torpedoed any chance that Kamala had in the race. Now, I happen to think that Kamala, being as stupid as she is, that was predestined. She had no chance. and voters didn't like her. Did Tulsi finish her off perhaps faster? Good argument for that. Did Tulsi herself ever have a chance of winning that nomination? No. Democrats weren't going to let that happen any more than they were going to let Bernie win. Everyone forgets that was the first steal in 2020. It was the Iowa caucus. It was done the same way. You go to bed, one guy's ahead. Suddenly they stopped counting, said we can't figure this out. It's so complicated. And ooh, boom, when they start counting again, Biden's ahead and declared the winner. So will we have a moment like that tomorrow night? Possibly. And it will get some people to watch. I don't think it will get anywhere near the numbers that it would have got with Trump there, but he was right to turn that down. Why enrich Fox? Why help his enemies? But certainly a few people will see it as a sideshow and be curious about the sideshow and the bearded lady and see how that goes. But as we go forward into Thursday morning, Trump will turn himself in. Will there be a protest in Atlanta of Trump supporters? I think so. Laura Loomer certainly is putting out the word to get people to go down there. Good question is, will I be down there? Not likely, to be honest. It is not going to be friendly territory. You know, if it were set up in such a way that I was sure that, say, the Georgia State Patrol would have jurisdiction over security, then I would be much more inclined to do it. If it's APD and Fulton County cops and all that kind of thing, I don't really feel the need to show up down there without it being better organized in terms of knowing what the security situation is going to be like. And that's unfortunate. We shouldn't have to give up our right to protest. I'm not one of these people that's going to tell other people not to go. If you are in Georgia or anywhere that you can get to it and you want to show up in support of President Trump Thursday, certainly encourage it. Will I do it? Again, the security details are just too damned fuzzy for me. Not really wanting to turn myself into a punching bag for Antifa tops or whoever the feds set up down there, or some fake Trump supporters, a Patriot Front type thing. Not interested in that. And I have my reasons for this too, in my involvement in politics. I consider myself lucky to have avoided what in hindsight I think was a setup in terms of a protest, and gladly looking back on it, it never came to fruition. And now looking at the players and looking at certain similarities to things that happened on January 6th, so glad that I was not ultimately part of that, and that the whole thing imploded before it ever was actually a live event. But having learned these lessons and knowing things from the inside and how they work, yeah, you would have to assure me better of security before I would go down there. However, anyone else, please do. It will be fun. Trump will certainly capitalize upon it. It has been helping him, in fact. And we're going to talk about the specifics of that help in some new numbers right after this. Don't go away. Hang in there, folks. but he can't win the general. That's what they all keep saying. Oh yeah, Trump's ahead, but he can't win the general. And now I've just come to the point, every time I see this, I'm like, show me the hard data. Cite a source. Show me. Because we know at this point, we can tell in the polling data. I don't believe that you have to believe every poll that comes out, but you're a fool if you ignore the trend lines. And the trend lines all say this doesn't match up to 16 or 20. This is a whole new game. Throw your old playbook out. This is a different election, and people are being motivated in different ways by different pressures. And so if your insistence is to look at this and say a replay of 2020, just because it would likely be the same two candidates, that is the most facile reasoning that you could come up with, is just because it's the same two people that it's the same contest. People have experienced much more over the last 2.5 years or so. Chiefly, they've lived through the pain of the Biden administration. People are remembering just what a callous ass this man has always been. And frankly, the charges of dementia, which certainly the man is suffering mentally. He's old and he is declining, no question. But it's always helped him that expectations have been lowered for him because of that. And the reality is, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, he was still an obnoxious jerk whose ambition far outpaced his smarts. Very dumb man, but also very arrogant and ambitious, unduly so, but nonetheless, he is and was. And now people have lived that, and they've lived the inflation, and they've lived the Afghanistan withdrawal. They lived those COVID mandates. They've watched their savings disappear. They've watched their tax bills go up. They've watched their insurance bills go up. Their food bills go up. Everything go up. It's getting hard to keep up with it. And if you don't think that makes a difference, you're crazy. But yes, people still have a basic sense of fairness about the justice system and using it to dogpile a political opponent just because you don't like his politics. And every new poll that comes out reinforces the idea that each new indictment only helps Trump. And it doesn't just help him in the GOP race, it helps him against Biden. Oops. I said this early on, over a month ago now, that I was kind of looking forward to the Fannie indictment because I knew it was going to happen anyway. There was no turning that ship around. But I knew, and I said this on Twitter, watch the guy. He's going to bounce up to like 65% almost immediately. And people are going to figure out what a clown show that Fulton County and Atlanta really is. And that has come true. In some polls specifically, some polls have had Trump as high as 65% in the primary now. Now, that's not all of them, granted. But you can't, again, ignore the trend line, which all of them seem to show Trump continuing to improve and do better. We get a new round of them today. This from Harris is the pollster. In The GOP primary raised Trump at 52%, 40 points ahead of DeSantis at 12. Interestingly, Ramaswamy at 10%. I mean, that's basically a statistical tie between those two. And if you look at it too in the matchup, presidential has Biden ahead by 1 over Trump. And I was looking because I know that they did the versus the DeSantis too, but I'm not seeing it at the moment. But it is the same as most every other. Even the polls that show Biden, say, ahead by 1 over Trump, Trump is still performing better in that head-to-head than DeSantis does, where Biden is beating him by 4, 5, 6 points or more. Basically, a 1-point lead is a statistical tie. And keep in mind that that's a position that Trump has not usually enjoyed in any of these head-to-head matchups ever. This is a new show of strength for him. So that one was pretty interesting. And again, these numbers since the Atlanta indictment. Here is another one. This is premise data. This showing Trump at 60% versus DeSantis at 16%. I mean, it's just wild, and the trend line is unmistakable amongst all of them. New indictments, Trump gets a bump, DeSantis continues to go down, gets more and more parity with folks like Ramaswamy, who people are starting to pay attention to, but also just recognize that DeSantis is just all but dead at this point. So let's look at the head-to-head on that one. Again, this is premise data. This one gives Trump a substantial lead over Biden, 43% to 38%. That's one of the stronger showings that I've seen. If you look at the head-to-head Biden-DeSantis, Biden at 37%, so you'll see he keeps pretty consistent numbers either way. But DeSantis down at 34%, 3 points behind. Now, again, all of those are hypotheticals. I grant you. But why would any semi-intelligent person keep up this talking point of, well, Trump can't win the general? I really worry about the mental capacity of people who continue to use that argument in the face of all data that shows otherwise. All data that shows that Trump performs best head-to-head of any of the other candidates. All of the polling data that shows you this is not a repeat of 20 or even 16, that there are brand new factors at play that are motivating voters who have felt disenfranchised and are eager to show their support for President Trump. And all that they can do ultimately is fall back on these negatives, these unfavorability ratings that get pulled out of certain polls saying that people just don't like Trump. I have news for you. Look at the favorability ratings of most individual politicians or the bodies that they belong to. Congress has just an absurdly low approval rate, has, as long as I can remember, sometimes flirting with single-digit kind of approval. And yet the one thing that you can bet on in most every election cycle is that most incumbents are safe. Because when it gets down to it, you cannot like a person, but when you have to finally make that choice, you make the choice that you think is good for you. And most people are going to vote on their pocketbooks and the economy and all the chaos going on. And it will far outpace this sense of dislike that people think that you're supposed to express for Trump. And we've seen it over and over. I mean, politicians with low favorability ratings isn't a new thing. You cannot equate their unfavorable rating with the number of people who will definitely vote against them. It's just not so. People need to know that. If people bring this up, tell them, show me the data. I need to see the data. And with that, we're going to wrap up Command Briefing for tonight. And I appreciate you joining. I'm your host, Jared A. Chambers. Follow me on Twitter at C4CEO. I do appreciate you listening. Tell a friend about this if you're listening. Share it on your timeline. Spread the word. We're trying to really grow this, folks. And the more you help me grow it, the more cool things we can do with it over time. Hope to bring in some good guests, make it really compelling, but help spread the word. I appreciate it. Thank you.